Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Understories with me, your host, Lindsay Fowler. This week, I speak to Andy Goodwin and Tom Parker, founders of Fettle Design, a studio that's based in Los Angeles and London. The business that Andy and Tom have built is a brilliant example of how you can be international, do a diverse range of projects while remaining small, and be, as they would say, the first multinational company with 2 employees. They talk openly about the balance it takes to grow a studio in 2 different countries. We discuss how they've taken an active decision to focus on hospitality interiors. We also talk about why they chose to grow their studio slowly and thoughtfully so they could maintain relationships, while at the same time learning to delegate and relinquish control, which ultimately led to stronger projects. Before we get started, if you like this podcast, please give us a rating or review wherever you're watching or listening to this. Tell a friend, and don't forget to subscribe so that you get notified about future episodes, which will be coming out every Tuesday. And now, here's my conversation with Tom and Andy of Fettle Design. All right. Well, Andy and Tom, thank you so much for joining the Understories podcast. I really appreciate you being here. It's so nice to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, a pleasure. So for those of the listeners that don't know what Fettle Design is or where they are, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do? I know you specialize in hospitality design, but can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing, how you got there, how you guys met, those kind of things? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not a problem. So we're an interior architecture and design studio, like you say, focusing on within the hospitality industry, primarily restaurant spaces and hotels, although we've also worked a few minor residential projects and lucky enough to have worked on some members clubs too. We have studios here in London that myself and the team here in London oversee, and then Tom works out of LA and oversees the work over there.
How did you end up doing this split between London and LA? That's one of the main questions I wanted to ask, because I mean, not only from a time zone perspective, which is difficult because obviously it's 8 hours behind, but or 9 depending where you are. But how does that work? How big is your team in London? How big is your team in LA? How do you guys work together that way?
I will let Tom speak at some point, I promise. I don't know many companies that started this way, but Tom and I always laughed that we were the first multinational company with 2 members of staff. So the reality is that Tom and I met many moons ago at a design studio called United Designers based out of Tower Bridge.
Okay.
That was one of my first companies at university. I think same for you, right, Tom?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was my first job actually out of college, university.
And then following that, Tom got a job at the other side of the city, working in West London with Martin Bradinsky, and I kind of followed shortly afterwards. And then kind of from there, in terms of how the company kind of came to be, both Tom and I were working within the studio, relatively similar roles within the office. However, I don't know how long you were there, Tom, before you moved, but I kind of was overseeing part of the London-based studio there, and Tom moved to New York for a brief time, right, Tom?
Yeah, I did about 3.5 years in New York. I know, just because I'd always kind of wanted to live abroad, and it got to a certain point with MBDS in London, and the opportunity came up to move to their New York studio. So we kind of took that, and then from there, I think we'd always, me and Andy had always talked about starting a business together, and we'd been thinking about it for probably best part of 10 years or so. And then it just, while I was in New York, the opportunity we got a few potential projects, so the opportunity came up for us both to kind of sort of take the leap and go for it, really. But then I wasn't quite ready to come back to the UK. Yeah. That's what kind of naturally led to us starting the business in 2 different countries at the same time. Essentially, was just the geography of me being in the States and Andy being in the UK. But it's something we planned to do for a very long time.
So I mean, that is incredibly interesting to do that and to start out that way. How did you structure the business in the beginning? Was it just one taking on projects in one side of the world and that kind of thing, or did you how did you consciously build this? I'm really interested in this.
Well,
or unconsciously, as it might be.
Yeah, it was more just, it was more, I think once we'd taken the leap, it was kind of dictated by where we got our first set of projects. So a lot of our early projects came through clients that we'd known for a long time in London. And so I was traveling back to the UK a lot, and Andy and I were in a sort of small box room working together on this essentially initially it was a series of very small kind of restaurant sort of touch-ups, really light refurbishments, and gradually it kind of grew from there. So most of our early, I'd say probably our first sort of 4 or 5 projects were in the UK, and Andy through one of his contacts then landed our first kind of more sizable project in Windsor, and then from there, once we completed that round of projects, we were then lucky enough to pick up Hoxton Hotel in Portland, so near where you're from.
Oh, really? You guys did that one?
Yeah.
I didn't realize. Oh, fantastic!
So we did that, and at the same time we landed that, we also landed a project called the Draycott in Los Angeles with Matt and Marissa Hermer, and they both happened. We were probably a year and a half into the business by the time we sort of landed those first US projects. So we'd had a chance to kind of really work together on some more localized UK stuff in the meantime. And then it just, from there, it just kind of grew naturally. We have 9 people in the London studio currently, and 7 here in the US. So the London studio is still kind of, marginally bigger, but over the years it's kind of balanced out a bit, and now we kind of run a lot of the jobs sort of simultaneously, which is great.
Wow.
Yeah, I think in the early days, because obviously we were picking up, because of Tom and I's background, to be honest, more than anything else, we ended up picking up a fair number of projects in the UK. Not all from a size perspective, but certainly from a kind of quantum. So we ended up developing a team and the designers here, and for the first maybe couple of projects, right, Tom? We kind of did a lot of the production of information was done out of the UK, and then gradually Tom grew his team over there as kind of we picked up more projects in the US. And I think now, from a project quantity perspective, there's probably a similar amount of live projects in both studios, but the big difference is the scale of those projects, where in London we're typically doing a smaller restaurant projects and 1 or 2 hotels, whereas Tom will tell you that the projects in the US from a scale alone perspective are much larger and probably more complex at the same time, I'd say.
That's incredible. Does the team work obviously you guys are partners in this, but does the team work collaboratively in terms of design, or do they kind of work in their own sort of spaces and meet up maybe once a year? Or do you guys have anything that kind of brings that sense of cohesion?
Originally, the team probably were much more collaborative in terms of the UK team working on US projects and vice versa. I think as the studio has grown and now we're relatively kind of self-contained, I think, in that regard, with the exception of obviously Tom and I, who communicate daily. There are projects, however, where there's crossover, where we have UK-based clients who we do a lot of work with. San Carlo, for example, who are doing a project with us, and that Tom and his team are running out of Miami. So on those projects, there's a lot of collaboration, and then vice versa. There's projects where, from a scale perspective in the US, that they're huge projects. So we've utilised the team in the UK it's beneficial in terms of an idea creation, as well as kind of resourcing potential. In terms of how interconnected the studio are, it's probably not as much as we'd like, but it's something that we're trying to develop. Like you say, that the 7-hour time difference is a little bit of 7 today, 8 normally. Is the slightly more difficult thing to manage, where Tom and I speak to. Luckily, Tom's a morning person, and I work late into the night, so it kind of works for us at the moment. But whether or not that would do for the wider team is a bit more difficult to manage.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I'm trying to think about how to ask this, because it sounds like it's grown quite organically, but based on the projects that you've gotten on board. Is there, I guess the idea was to always stay in hospitality. There was, with the exception of the few resi projects that you do, how did you make that decision? Is it just something that you like doing, to stick into the hospitality side of things, or have you ever thought about different sectors? Or
I think both of our both the companies that we worked at, so Martin Marinsky and United Designers, were essentially hospitality focused companies. But at the same time, we've both over the years experienced residential projects, and I think probably both our personalities and probably kind of aspirations are certainly more in line with doing hospitality projects, I would say. We've both found the pace of residential probably more challenging. I think there's a dynamism to hospitality projects and a workflow and a kind of drive from everybody to kind of move forwards at a certain pace that I think we both really enjoy. And just seeing kind of projects moving quickly and a team, a bigger team kind of working together and kind of being inspired, and projects completing on a regular basis. And it's I think that's probably what draws us mostly to hospitality, and the fact you're kind of creating these environments that we can all experience. We can go to go to our finished projects all the time. Our friends can go. It's a kind of different result, I think, when you complete those kind of projects.
Yeah, I understand that completely, because my background is I used to work at Red Deer, and so they massive into hospitality, and there was such a joy because there was a sense of completion that you would get quite quickly, because you got capexes to think about. Everyone wants to get the project over the line. Residential is it's a little bit more like therapy and kind of like emotional management, and it's just a different skill set. I think some people love it, right? Some people love residential, but I think that if you enjoy the hospitality thing, the resi can be quite a slow burn, and also it can be just hard to get things over the line, make decisions and things like that. So
it's also very sorry,
go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
It's also very kind of client specific. I think we found that the first residential project we did in London was fantastic because we had a really close relationship with that particular client. But I think I've always found that when we look at residential projects, it's much harder to judge how difficult it's going to be, because it's so much personality based and so much based on your relationship with that specific person or that specific family. I think it's always seemed like slightly higher risk, I think, to Andy and I.
I understand that.
It's taste driven as well, right? So with a hospitality interior, in fact, the residential projects that we've done before have been with hospitality clients that we know, who essentially said, "You are designing our house." That was the one that we originally first worked on, and within that particular client's hospitality world and kind of experience, he's looking for us, or he was looking for us to create an environment. He was quite daring with his colour palettes and everything else. And don't get me wrong, the home that we created for them is incredibly eclectic, and it has some of the touches in terms of the FF&E that we'd look to do within other projects. But generally, it's much more it's safer as an interior, because you've got to live with that, right, day in day out, rather than it being a special event going there, which is why Tom and I find it a little bit more. It's probably more, I would say, I'd say it's more rewarding, and you get to kind of push the boundaries a little bit more within those hospitality environments.
Yeah, I feel like people are maybe on the hospitality side are slightly more willing to have those risks, because it creates storytelling. It creates an attraction for people. I mean, obviously, we used to get asked, like, what's the Instagram shot? What is the sort of the thing that people are going to be posting about? So I understand that completely. My focus is mainly on business side of things. Like, I love design. I'm massively into it, but I'm always really interested in how people work with their businesses and how that they balance the creative side with the commercial side, especially in sort of design, where you start a business, you want to create beautiful spaces, but then all of a sudden you realize you have to wear about 1 billion different hats, and you have to be a business person. What's been some of the biggest challenges that you guys have found? Actually, when did Fettle start, by the way? I didn't ask you that. When did you guys get going?
Oh, that's a difficult question. It was
officially.
Tom, can you remember this?
Yeah, officially it was summertime 2015.
There we go.
Okay.
Even back at kind of when we were in our first ever job, we do like these tiny little sort of side projects, and no real design projects, but it was more kind of renderings for certain things, or we'd kind of the original roots of it are kind of way back. But I think we officially both went full time on with Fettle in 2015 kind of summertime.
Right. Okay. So in the 8 years since that you've started, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've come across in building a business around your creative pursuits?
I think if we're honest, we're definitely better from the creative side than we are the business side.
Right.
We and to be honest, the business has grown organically and in many ways probably slightly slower than maybe we anticipated it would do right at the start of setting up the business together. And that's kind of been deliberate choices that we've made as we've gone through. Because look, when Tom and I were working in larger studios, I think that we were becoming less and less involved creatively in the projects that we were working on, and we wanted to maintain that kind of connection with the work that we were doing. So as we've grown this team, we've wanted to do that slowly, just to make sure that we were able to kind of give the same kind of level of service to all of our clients and
Sure.
get that kind of intimacy with the projects and the client teams. In terms of from a business perspective, it probably comes more from Tom than me, but we've always kind of thought that, look, if we just keep doing a good job from a design perspective, and that will kind of stand us in good stead, and the kind of financial element will sort itself out in the long run. And as it stands, that's kind of been the process, to be honest. We've kind of steadily grown the projects that we're working on and the number of team that we've had, but I think we've kind of, to be honest, we've learned that as we've gone. We kind of stumbled across it, and we're still learning. I don't think we're particularly great at the business side of things always, but there you go.
So what are some of the things that you'd want to learn about in your business then that you found a bit more challenging? Is it around marketing, or is it around culture, or what are some of the things that you struggled with?
I think one of the things I do think is tricky that I notice about probably we have obviously a lot of good friends who didn't necessarily start their own firms, who are still at larger companies or helping oversee larger companies. And I think there's, when you start your own firm, especially if it's a relatively modestly sized firm like we are, I think that you lose some access to kind of new knowledge in a way, and new just things that are evolving within the industry. I was talking to, I've got a friend who's very high up at another firm here in LA, and I think that because they have, it's a firm of sort of 45, 50 people, and they just have this absorption of new ideas and new processes, and especially in the case that I was talking to him about, was about kind of implementation of new technology and AI. And I think that when you start your own firm and it's relatively small, you lose a lot of the input that you get within a larger studio to some extent, and you have to be much more proactive, I think, about staying on top of what's going on in the industry from a technology perspective, or from a culture perspective, or from a trend perspective. I think you have to be, Andy and I have had to be much more proactive about that stuff. And it was stuff that actually when we were at, for example, at MBDS, there was, people would kind of, between New York and London, there were probably 50 or 60 designers there who were all coming across kind of new information or new, whatever it is, new technologies. And that then gets absorbed back into the studio. So the studio culture naturally is very, very strong, just due to the breadth of the people within the studio. So I think that's been tricky, just learning that we have to actively go out and research and look for things and go to events, and even with the networking, it doesn't, a lot of these things come to you when you're at a bigger studio, but actually when you're a 16 person studio like we are, you have to be much more conscious of what you want to learn and of what's going on in the industry, and be much more kind of actively minded about it, I think, which has certainly been, I think it's certainly something we're certainly still working on that right now.
But the people in your studio that you've got right now, I'm imagining they must bring fresh ideas and things like that to your work, right? So is it a case so is it going beyond that in sort of a much more expansive way?
I think if you've got, let's say in our case, 14 people bringing in new ideas is very different to 50 or 60 people bringing in new ideas. So I think it's more the approach and the method is the same, but it's just on a much smaller scale. And it's less so now than it was when we were, 6 or 7 people. Then obviously it's
Sure.
a very different thing. But I think it's just the scale of ideas that come into the studio and the amount of information that comes into the studio is an interesting difference, really.
We've also been quite lucky. Certainly slightly different in the US, but kind of similar there as well. We've been really lucky in that the team that we've kind of built here in the UK. Most of the people have been here quite a number of years now. So there's we've not had like a massive influx of new people all the time. There's not a huge staff turnover at all, which is great in many ways, and everyone knows what's happening, which is fantastic. But like Tom says, that doesn't mean that you have like all these new ideas kind of constantly coming in and different practices and other things. I mean, the other thing that I have realised, or not realised, starting to realise, I suppose, from a business perspective, is just to kind of remain level-headed and calm as much as possible. I think I certainly am. I certainly am very emotional as a person. I think Tom is as well. That I don't know whether that's natural from a design perspective.
I think that's pretty normal. Yeah.
And actually, from within a business world, actually having a bit more of a level head and a calmness is more desirable. Certainly, things like Tom and I laugh all the time. We always are, I don't know, a month away from not having enough work or panicking that we've got too much, and it's always one week, and it changes daily, let alone monthly. And I think often, Tom and I probably spent too much time worrying about that kind of thing, and whereas the longer we've been doing it, the more we just realise it will sort itself out, and thus far it always have. We've never got to a point where we couldn't get work done, and we've never likewise got to a point where we haven't got anything to do. So just trusting the process and trying to remain as level-headed as we can through that is something that I think we've probably learned, right, Tom?
Yeah, I think we probably over the years have spent way too high a percentage of our time in sheer terror. Gradually, I think we're getting that under control a bit more.
Yeah, I was talking to someone earlier today about when you're first starting in your business, the highs are super high and the lows are super low. Yeah. But then I think as the more that you get into it, the more comfortable you get with the fact that the highs and the lows are going to happen, you kind of you kind of are prepped for the fact that if you're on a high, you kind of expect that the low will come relatively quite soon. So you don't wallow in the high too much, and you also don't wallow in the low as much either, because you think, well, it will 100%. Come out of this at some point. But yeah, I mean, because
so I was going to say, I mean, the other thing is, and this kind of is part of that is, I think more and more, Tom's got a young family, and so have I, and I think we've in the past, especially seeing as we were kind of a relatively small studio, we kind of felt like we could outwork it and kind of keep going. And hours wise, Tom and I work 7 days a week, ridiculous hours a day for years and years and years. And it's only relatively recently that we've realised, actually, do you know what, we can't outwork this anymore. It's putting the sheer hours into this isn't the best use of our time. And actually, we're certainly getting better at having a better like work-life balance. Not that I don't think Tom or I have ever kind of sacrificed our family life necessarily, but we have sacrificed sleep. Probably is the biggest one, right, Tom? We've learned to survive on about 4 hours a day for a couple of years, and now we're kind of getting that back. The 8-hour time difference doesn't always help on that, but we're getting better at that for sure.
So with that, I mean, as you've gotten older and you've gotten, your families, they require more attention. And, how does that impact your ability to keep your finger on the creative part as much as you have in the past? Have you found that a challenge to negotiate?
I think it's, I think we've learned to sort of structure our working environment in a way that, we're not able to go out to new restaurants every night anymore. We're not able to kind of constantly, when we first started the business, we would kind of be on, traveling a lot. I'd be kind of bouncing backwards and forwards between kind of London and New York a bit. And I think you just realize that, once you can't do that, you just need to find other ways of structuring the studio in a way that you can have those kind of creative inputs and we can receive as much creative inspiration as possible. For example, last week, one of our team from the LA studio went to Next Gen, the HD show in Miami, and it's usually something that Andy I would have gone to. And
Right.
I just think you've got to, we've had to structure the studio in a way that allows us to spend the quality time we want to with our families. We both love the studio and we love what we do, but I think for both of us, it's certainly, it's without being cold about it, it's a means to an end. We both want to enjoy our work lives, but it's certainly secondary to family life, and we just have to structure the studio accordingly, essentially.
And is that, I mean, you were saying that you used to work all hours before when you were first starting. So would you say that's sort of more down to the age of the studio, the growth that you guys have had, the way that you sort of approach it? Or do you feel like you kind of miss that a little bit?
It's probably to do with what we both like as people, if I'm honest.
Okay.
What we worked at studios in the past that were challenging to work in, and Tom and I both worked mental hours within other studios, and from a culture perspective, that was the absolute opposite of what we wanted to do when we were kind of building the studio together. So if there was ever someone who was going to work late and have to do those extra hours, then it would always be us ahead of the rest of the team. So and I don't know, we were relatively pessimistic about are we going to get the next job, etc. So we always we kind of were on this treadmill where we're kind of running on capacity most of the time. And as the years have gone by, I think we've learned to the positives of kind of delegating responsibility to the wider team. I think they have the ideas that the wider team and the guys and girls that we've got in the studio here generate are stronger ideas often than what we can generate ourselves. So actually, we are really there just to kind of make sure that we're following the right processes and kind of be that oversight over the project, rather than kind of be in the weeds, if you like, designing every element. And I think, I don't know, probably for both of us, right, Tom? Like, as we've relinquished some of the control of the projects, I think the studio's grown better, and the projects that we produce are stronger as a result. And there's more kind of there's more of a range of an aesthetic that's been created, and that's all because we've kind of passed that responsibility down the line to the team.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, we started the conversation in a way of you talking about how you started the company because you wanted to get involved in all the creative parts of it and things like that. And now you come around, you're 8 years in, and now it's like you've delegated some of these aspects. Do you feel like you're missing out on any of the creative side of things, or do you feel like the benefits outweigh this now? And then maybe where is your creative output now in this sense? It's kind of a loaded question. I don't know.
Well, I think the kind of delegating of things is we've done it in a sensible way, where we're still Andy and I still very, very much involved in the creative of all of the projects, and Andy, like I could tell you any detail that's happening on any of the projects in the UK. He'd be able to tell you kind of the finest details of every single project. But it's a lot of the stuff. There's a lot of stuff within a studio like ours that we shouldn't. It's not beneficial for us to be involved in, and we don't need to have a minute amount of information on. And I think it's just being selective. We've approached this in a way that we've been selective about what information we don't need to be involved in, so we can free up more of our time to firstly keep the studio kind of buzzing and inspired and everyone enjoying it, but also secondly, so we can focus on like the key creative elements. So I think it's a bit of a balance. Although we've grown, although we've kind of put processes in place, we've done that in order to allow us both to have a lot of creative involvement across all projects, really.
That's really smart. Can you give us some examples of the things that you've made a conscious decision not to be doing anymore?
I think we try and avoid the minutiae of, we know we're in trouble when we catch ourselves working in a FF&E schedule, or when we catch ourselves working on a door detail, or we catch ourselves in any kind of minute detail in CAD, which we still do it, but we usually get told off for it by various different people now. But it's those kind of details that someone else can work on those details, and we can have a quick look at them, obviously, and make sure that we as business owners, we need to make sure that everything we're producing as a studio is correct, and we're building the thing that we've envisioned building, but we try to stay a bit more out of the minutiae of some of those kind of elements, I would say, in order to free up our time to focus on the overarching creative and how this relates to other, especially these days. There's such visibility when you finish a project. One of the key things that Andy and I talk about is how what we're doing maybe relates to what other studios are doing or what other projects are finished. And every kind of new project we come across, you have to understand what else is out there already and what is, even what's being completed currently, so that what the project you're producing, where that fits into the kind of wider scheme of things. If we as business owners don't understand that, then there's no point us commenting on all these little kind of details and bits and pieces that help build those projects.
It's also the meetings that we join and site visits that we go on. I mean, it's probably only been a few years since I used to go to every site meeting, because I
Right.
like that. I like the energy. We were asked recently, like, what's your kind of the part of the process that you enjoy the most? And for me, it will probably be those early to middle stages on site, when everything starts to come together and you're working with specialists about reviewing prototypes or details. I love that element of it. So I'd always end up kind of pushing myself into work, going to those meetings. And actually, it's much more beneficial to not go to every meeting, because then if there is something that needs to, we need to really push the team to change something or make it work, we've got much more kind of power within that meeting if we're not there, at 7 o'clock on a Thursday morning, 3 times a week, twice a week, once a month, whatever it is. If we're only there for those kind of bigger decisions. And likewise, when you're working on a hotel, there's 300 different meetings about, where the electrical cabinets or where you're going to locate risers are going to be. And in the past, I think we'd feel like that we should support the team and be on those calls. We don't need to be on those calls. We can, if there's a problem, we'll review that afterwards, or speak with the client team. But there's plenty of, our team are super strong, and they're more than capable of being able to do those without us.
Did you consciously hire people or that you could nurture throughout the early stages of their career, that you could end up to being able to delegate them, or did you bring in senior people sort of at the beginning?
It's probably different in both studios, but certainly in the UK, we were always we took kind of the responsibility of the budgets that we have and the projects that we're working on incredibly seriously, and as a result, we were and still are to a degree, but certainly initially we were very top heavy. We had a lot of seniors, a lot of very certainly very experienced members of the team, because we just wanted to make sure that everyone was had all the abilities that they needed to be able to totally run projects. Now, actually, as we are growing more and we've taken on more people recently, we've actually realised that yes, that's important, and we do need to make sure that we have that knowledge within the studio, but we also need to allow people to grow. So actually, just taking on more senior members of staff doesn't. Again, Tom's talked about the size of the office. We need to employ people that have enough kind of there's enough growth within those members of the team, so to allow them to be here for a decent amount of time. I'm assuming it's kind of it's relatively similar with the team over in the US, right, Tom?
Yeah, I think so. And I think probably in terms of your query about kind of taking on people that we could help grow, I think we have done that in a way, but probably in a slightly more subconscious way, that I think we've always hired based on personality first and foremost. Obviously, people need to have a certain level of requisite experience, but I think everyone that we've hired over the years has all been a similar personality type, in terms of being they're all pretty very easy to get on with, very positive, very proactive about design, have a passion for design, but are also very, for the most part, everyone in the studio is very easygoing and they're all kind people, essentially. And I think that we've, in that way, that personality type lends itself very well to work in with senior members of the studio, or working with Andy and I directly in terms of them being able to grow. But I don't think we necessarily looked specifically for people that we could help to grow, but that personality type that we have within the studio, I think lends itself well to that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like hiring for culture fit first.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a baseline for the skill set, of course. You have to have the hard skills, but having the people that actually fit in, that will grow with you because they work culturally is really important. So what's the future hold for you guys? What are your big plans for the studio?
God knows.
I think we've got we're in the middle at the moment of some really, really exciting projects, and we've got quite a large series of openings at the start of next year, both in Europe and in the US as well. It's a number of projects that we've been working on for quite a while, and both studios are coming to fruition, which is very exciting. And I
That's
think
really exciting.
that in turn then will lead to, I think that will lead us on to some really, really great projects with those clients, but also with some new clients. So we're kind of always it feels like we're coming to the end of a cycle of current projects, which is exciting, I think, from our perspective.
So those projects will kind of kickstart as sort of another leg up or level up in terms of the type of work that can come to you. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if necessarily a level up, but I just think probably another wave of projects. I think Andy and I are really lucky in that we get to work on quite diverse projects in a way. So we're working on a great historic flagship hotel with Lock in Paris, for example. But at the same time, we're working on a really old mountain resort in Utah that's very kind of cabiny. And then we've got restaurants in both, slightly higher end restaurants in both London and LA and Miami, so that we get to work on this great kind of diverse range of projects. And I think this finishing an initial round of these kind of very diverse projects will just lead us hopefully into kind of more diverse stuff. I think that it's probably that diversity that I don't think we want to do the same type of project or same aesthetic again and again. And I think that diversity of projects kind of leads to more diversity of projects, which I think is what drives us both. It's always more exciting for us when we come across a new type of project that we've not necessarily done before, which I think the newness and the variety is what keeps us both motivated to some extent.
And just as I'm out of my own curiosity, really, is obviously the pandemic made hospitality shut down. How did you guys negotiate the pandemic?
It was through fluke, I would have said, more by luck than design, as with everything that Tom and I have done today. So I, Tom and I had a meeting in December 2019 with a potential client for a project that only finished last year. So One Warwick, the second members club with Mortimer House. We pitched on that. So we had a meeting 23rd, Tom, something like that, 23rd of December. I remember you were over. It was the last day before Christmas. We met Guy and the team at 5:00 on the last working day of the year, had a tour around the site. We then did a pitch in 2 weeks in January, won the project in the end of January. I remember at the time I had the first family holiday that I'd had for about 2 years. I was in Barbados, of all places, as the pandemic hit the UK, and everyone was.
Oh my gosh!
I remember flying home on the Wednesday, and on Thursday we sent everyone home, and they didn't come back to the office for 9 months. But we just signed this huge project, and that was kind of big enough to be able to allow all the team that we had in the studio to remain busy. We were also finishing Hoxton in Rome and Schwanlock in Munich. So the remote working, just the team are amazing, and they all work really hard and were super dedicated during that period. So the only difficulty really was kind of the physical samples, physical site meetings. So I worked from the office, and I did that in the UK, and Tom did the same in the US. We were kind of still going into the studio so we could do the sample reviews and those kind of bits, but the rest of the team were remote during that period. And actually, I think we learned a lot about ourselves and the team, and probably some of the lessons that we've learned about delegating responsibility, about what meetings we needed to be in, which ones we didn't, through that time.
I think also Andy kind of hit the nail on the head earlier, in that we were, a two-person multinational company, and kind of the way that we'd set up from the start. Andy and I probably in the 8 years we've been running the company, we've probably spent maybe one of those years in total in person. So I think
Wow.
we'd kind of naturally we're naturally used to that process, and we're naturally used to, when we review projects in the US or review projects in the UK. Even before the pandemic, we were very, very used to doing a lot of stuff remotely because of just the way the company had grown. So I think that really actually kind of helped us during that period, which again, as Andy says, was a complete fluke more than judgment.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I think that it has changed the way people work now, though. And I mean, I don't know how you guys are finding it, but when the clients that we work with, they talk a lot about the struggle with this hybrid working and things like that. Have you guys gone back to a full hybrid? Are you gone back to the office? Or are you guys doing hybrid? How are you structuring it now?
I think it varies between the two. Oh, sorry, Andy.
No.
I think it varies between the two studios, basically. But in London, and I think part of that is due to the timing at which we took certain people on. So in the US, for example, we grew during the pandemic. We were taking people on, but at the time, we had a couple of people come on board who I'd worked with previously in New York who weren't based in LA, but because of the situation with the pandemic, it made little difference where they were because we weren't going to be in person anyway. So
yeah,
in that way, and they've now been with us for 3 or 4 years, both those people, and
they're still in New York.
They're still
well.
one's actually in the Bay Area in San Francisco,
Okay.
and one's in Connecticut.
Okay.
But they're both like phenomenal employees. They're both friends who I trust completely,
Yeah.
and we just got to a stage where, for me at least, we within the pandemic we'd kind of structured the US side of the business slightly differently to the London side because it's just because of the logistics of the US. A lot of our network here is more spread out. So I think we've kept it in the US. We've kept some people, the people based in LA come in 3 days a week, and then there's 2 days remote. But then we also have 2 staff who are entirely remote, and one other staff member who's predominantly remote. So it's a bit of a mixed bag here. And Andy can talk a bit more kind of to the structure in London, but I think that a lot of that was born out of how we grew during the pandemic, which I think was interesting.
It's also to do with the time difference as well.
Yeah.
Like Tom's working in the US, we've got projects in LA, in Utah, in Miami, in Vegas. Obviously, some of those are all on the same time zones, but not all. And Tom's working across multiple time zones all the time. Whereas in the UK, we've got projects in Europe, but I mean we're talking an hour's time difference, if that, most of the time. So it's slightly different with that regard. But yeah, in the UK, we do 4 days in the office, and then we work remotely 1 day.
Okay.
I think it kind of depends on what stage of the project everyone's at, but we're super collaborative within the office, and I think that it's useful when you're doing certain elements of the project to be a bit more kind of hands-on and red pen on a piece of paper kind of.
Sure.
That's also probably to do with the scale of the projects that we're working on as well. Not always, but I'd say as a general rule, I don't know whether you'd agree, Tom, but the UK kind of turnaround on projects is probably shorter. We've got tighter programs and smaller scale projects. We've got like more probably of the restaurant projects that are smaller scale, whereas in the US everything's bigger.
Right.
Tom's
I mean, everything is bigger in the US, right?
No, not quite everything, but yeah. Tom's waistline is certainly smaller than mine, but yeah, other than that, most of our projects are much bigger.
But I have just a big question about this, because I think that the challenge with remote working is the communication with people, right? That's the biggest challenge, right? So how do you guys manage that?
I think it might be easier for me to speak to that a bit because we have more people who are constantly remote. But I think it's really just about being organised and putting those that kind of structure in place and making sure that you just have those meetings booked in. And as Andy alluded to, different phases of project work require different amounts of meetings. So if someone's working on a drawing package, we may not need to speak every day. It may be a case that we kind of, once a week we're reviewing where they're at and they're just checking in occasionally in the meantime. But I think it's just about kind of being organised with and understanding what's needed for any given process at any particular phase in the project, essentially. But it's very, I do think it's very doable once you're used to it. There was certainly, I think, a learning process involved in that, and a learning how to structure, for me at least, learning how to structure my time in order to get the best out of anyone that is working remotely and to keep everything moving. But it's not, at the same time, it's not. Is it easier having everyone in person so you can, go over to someone's desk and review some stuff? Absolutely, yeah. I don't think there's any doubt about that, really. But that said, I think there are also huge benefits to remote working when it's implemented in the correct way. And we've designed recently a couple of co-working spaces in New York, so we've seen it from the design perspective as well, which has been really interesting. But I think when things are planned correctly, it can be very, very beneficial.
Do you guys use particular software to help you manage this stuff, or is it just calendars? How do you work with this?
It's mainly, to be honest, I don't think we work particularly differently from any other studio in this way. We have our office works out of Teams basically, and then we just use a lot of kind of screen shares essentially. We've got a couple of programs in the US that we use probably predominantly more than in the UK. Like we have a shared Bluebeam system in the US, so we can all mark stuff up at the same time. And then there's a kind of almost live kind of hand drawing program where we can mark up drawings live during a screen share on screen. But there's no rocket science behind what we're doing compared, I think, to what other people are doing.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, it's been really interesting to talk to you guys. I've followed your work for a while. I think it was when I saw is it the Munich lock you did? Is that the one that you recently completed? I think it was that one that I was like, oh, I'd really like to talk to them and figure out what they're on about. Cause I was like, cause also, you haven't named the studio after yourselves, right? It's not like Tom and Andy's design studio. It's like, it's a bit more anonymous that way. So it's always really interesting to find out, the story behind what a practice is about and the sort of the work that they do. So much appreciated.
It was a deliberate thing to not name the studio after ourselves, but in retrospect, naming it, especially in my accent when no one can understand what you're saying, having to spell it out on the phone was maybe.
Oh, because you're like Fettle.
Freddie Echo, Tango, Tango, Lima Echo. I've learnt that. Yeah, it means to fix and to make good from Sheffield or Yorkshire, where I'm from.
Yeah,
but also kind of means form. But I don't know whether we'd still make that decision now. I think we've gone too far down the road to change it at this point,
can't
Tom.
Change.
But
you're committed now. Yeah. It's been 8 years.
Yeah,
amazing. Well, if people want to find your work, where can they see what you've done?
Instagram is probably the best bet, right, Tom? Or on the website?
I think we've got a website that desperately needs some updating with a load of recent projects. So Instagram is probably a safe bet. So that's Fettle Design. I think a one word for our Instagram.
Amazing. Okay, well, thank you very much, you guys. It's been great to chat with you, and I will stop the video now and edit this all out eventually. Hold on. There we go.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks again to Tom and Andy for taking the time to join me. I have been a fan of theirs for a while, so it was great to learn more about what goes on behind the production of such beautiful work. Once again, if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, all those kind of things. We'll drop a new episode every Tuesday, and until then, be well. Understories was produced by Cloudfields and Kieran Fowler. The music is by Avaz, and branding is by Joe Jones. See you all next week.